Hello. On behalf of the coordinating committee for this, the 26th annual Spring Symposium, I want to say thank you all for coming out, those of you who are presenting, those of you who have come in order to see what all of the EOU students' projects have been for the year. And here to welcome you and say a few words, Dr. Kelly Ryan, EOU President.
I had to let him know I have my coffee in the corner. I'm still working on that this morning. Welcome, everybody. Yay, it's Spring Symposium. That means we almost made it, right? Welcome. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. Before I dive into my welcome, I want to share with you just a wee bit of history. The Spring Symposium began all the way back in the last century. In 1999, it was part of EOU's Sharing the Learning initiative, and it's been hosted annually ever since, except for 1 year. Guess when that year was? The pandemic, right? An archived article from The Voice, which is EOU's student newspaper, described the first symposium as a celebration of student achievement featuring 48 presentations in the arts, sciences, and humanities. This year marks the 26th Spring Symposium with well over 100 presentations, music, art, a film screening, yes, amen, let's cheer, poster, portfolio presentations, student readings, and social impact discussions. And Jill Gibbion wrote me this morning, one of them will be in Spanish. My goodness sakes, we have come a long way. You all have a very big day ahead of you, so my real goal here is to welcome you and make you feel welcome. Welcome to those of you who attend both online and in person. Our Oregon Teacher Pathway students, welcome. Greetings as well to my colleagues, the faculty and staff in attendance. Thank you for being here. Students, I just want to acknowledge all the work that you've done to get to this moment. I know that getting to the point where you're successfully able to deliver your research project or a creative project was a hurdle. It was intellectually, personally challenging. You showed up and you did the work, and it resulted in a finished project. You probably had other major priorities in your life, and you had to find balance and deal with the everyday on top of, the extreme challenges of being a student in 2025. It kind of sounds crazy, but you're probably always going to remember the project that you presented today. Us oldsters, we talk about the stuff we did in college all the time and what we learned. And I did some crazy good and some crazy bad projects in my time, but today I know I've grown as a thinker, a writer, a speaker. You got it, all of it, from each of those projects. So even though some of you may be nervous today, just try and take it all in. You stepped up, you did it, and these are keys to your future success. I want to thank the organizing committee who brought us together today for this just exceptional moment. Thank you to Steve Tanner, Tanya Lubez, Kevin Roy, Jacqueline Morgan, and Kevin Walker. I know all the students in this room have been supported on their journey to this conference by faculty. Faculty who've helped them hone in on a topic, focus students on getting the best evidence, push students' boundaries in an area of persuasion, presentation ability, or creativity. To each of the faculty in the room, and I see a good solid row right here, you have my deepest gratitude. Will you please stand, faculty? Come on, get up. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Tremendous work. In the same vein, a special thank you to those district schools, teachers who support our Oregon Teacher Pathway students in their work. And finally, we want to thank all the friends and family of our students, some of whom are with us today. Your support always makes their work possible. So while you're getting smarter, learning about everyone's projects today, I do encourage you to have some fun. Learning is actually supposed to be fun, so try and lean into it when you can. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Amy Yielding to the stage.
Hello, it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker to Spring Symposium 2025. Before he comes up here, I'll just give you a little bit of background. DJ actually first got exposed to the awesomeness of Eastern Oregon University at his high school in Hermiston through the Oregon Teachers Pathways program. So shout out to Tanya and the OTP students here today. That's a great program that has produced amazing students, at least in math. I can't speak for the others. Anyhow, when DJ came here, he became an OTP mentor. He is also one of our recipients of the Math Education Scholarship Award. This is an award dedicated funds that go to our future rural Oregon high school teachers to help them through the financial burdens of earning a college degree. So you future teachers out there, think about applying, and you might also have that support. The other thing that DJ was a student athlete. So shout out to our student athletes as well. That's right. We have 4 graduating with a math degree this year, which is the highest number that I'm aware of, at least in a very long time. For the math program, we ask our students to complete a year-long senior capstone project. This project is totally self-selected. The goal is that they take what they've learned in the classroom and throw it at a problem they don't understand, or a question they've always had, or just play the game of mathematics. It is not a surprise to me, although the slides just went away, but if you caught a glance, you'll notice that DJ decided to do a project that relates his mathematical learning with his athletics. I hope you'll find it interesting and fun. This is just a preview of his full capstone project that'll be presented to you all in the finals week. Anyhow, please join me in welcoming DJ Wilson up to the top here.
Gotta get set up here. All right. Oh, it's just because my computer went out. Of course, technology. All right. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, President Ryan. And thank you all for joining me for this talk here. As Amy said that I was a student athlete, I ran track here at EOU for 3 years. And in those 3 years, I learned a lot about how my 2 worlds of math and track came together. One track meet, actually my first one as a freshman, we went to the Podium in Spokane, and my track athletes here will know the Podium was a recently built indoor track facility, and EOU had the privilege to compete there for the first time my freshman year. And I just finished a 200-meter race when I go up to my head coach, Ben Welsh, and I said, Ben, how do they calculate the angles for these bank curves? And he goes, okay, Mr. Math Major, don't you have long jump or something that you can go? And so I went to long jump, but it never left me, it never left my mind. And so I was thinking about, in my senior capstone sequence, what can I do to combine these 2 worlds? And constructing the angle of a banked indoor track seemed pretty evident since I had that question all those years ago. Now, going into this presentation, we're thinking about how the professionals hired by these facilities are constructing these banks, considering a number of factors. And we have to begin like that, let's get into some definitions so we all know what we're talking about. A force diagram in the realm of physics is a diagram depicting all the forces acting on any given object in the form of vectors. Inertia is the resistance an object has to a change in its motion, so it's a force arriving from Newton's first law, an object in motion staying in motion, will stay in motion unless acted upon by the outside force. Inertia is the resistance to that outside force, the resistance to that change in motion. A vector is a quantity with properties of direction and magnitude, usually depicted by arrows in force diagrams. The normal force is a force that a surface exerts in order to prevent objects from passing through one another. Thank you, normal force, for keeping me from falling through this stage. Centripetal force is the force that acts on an object traveling along a curved path that keeps the object on that path, so it's the opposition of inertia. Centripetal force is the force going in towards the center of rotation. And then ideal velocity is the maximum velocity at which an object can travel on a banked frictionless surface without sliding off the edge. Ideal velocity usually has a relationship to a specific angle. So at a certain angle, an ideal velocity is calculated so that at that angle, you can go at a max speed so that you don't fly off the edge into oblivion. And that's not something you want to do as a track athlete. In terms of biomechanics, our first definition is kinematics, which is the study of motion without regard to the forces causing that motion. So it's just the way that our body moves through space. We're not thinking about inertia. We're not thinking about centripetal force. Just the way that our limbs and our body move through the space we're occupying. Eccentric lengthening refers to the instance when a muscle contracts during its elongating motion. So if I had a dumbbell in my right hand and I straighten my arm, that dumbbell is providing a load on my bicep muscle. The lengthening is the straightening of my arm, and the eccentric portion is the weight and the contraction of my bicep to hold that weight up. Plantar flexion is the movement of the ankle, or the sole of the foot bends down, creating an obtuse angle with the shin. Sprinters will know this is not a good idea, but when you have a flat foot here and you point your toe down and your toe moves away from your knee, that's plantar flexion. And then stance is the phase of the gait cycle, aka running, where one or both feet are in contact with the ground, and the important part that they're bearing weight. Now, in order to think about how these professionals are constructing these tracks and how they calculate the angles for these curves, we need to think about how a human navigates running. For me, that's just huffing and puffing and waiting for it to be over. But let's look at how a professional does it. This is Usain Bolt, greatest male sprinter to ever do it in the 100 and 200 meter races. He is navigating a straight, flat surface right now. And if he's the top of his field, we should be able to get a good idea of how a human should navigate this optimally. I put two dotted lines on there representing two angles and two portions of his body that are important when we navigate our stance. And that's the pelvic girdle angle, which is the horizontal line, and then the spinal angle, which is the vertical line. And these are both being compared to the surface that he's running on. A flat surface in a straight line. We want to have a near perpendicular vertical spinal angle and a near parallel to the surface of the track pelvic girdle angle. And so as you're running on a straight flat track, you want your pelvic girdle to be parallel and your spinal angle to be almost perpendicular. Now, unfortunately, 400 meter tracks are not all straight. 3,000 on a straight track would be like Broadway Avenue or something. But when we enter the curves of our track, we have two straights and two curves on a normal 400 meter track. We enter that curve, we're experiencing that change in motion that I was talking about with inertia. We're wanting to travel straight, but we're starting to turn. And so turning, moving away from a straight path, brings about inertia. And so humans, in order to not get thrown off of the side of the track, we need to do something to compensate for that inertial force. And that's where the lean comes in. Now these three runners are navigating a 400 meter track curve, and we can see that how the spinal angle and pelvic girdle angle are changing once we initiate that lean in order to counteract inertial forces. We can see that the vertical dotted line, our spinal angle, is tilted with the top towards the inside of our turn radius. And we can see that our pelvic girdle angle, the inside towards the pelvic or towards the turn radius, is lower than the outside. Now there's some pretty important implications of this lean that come about, especially when we get further into indoor track. But we can see how on the left side of the hip, there's a shorter distance from your left side of your pelvic girdle to the track, meaning your left leg has to be shortened in order to compensate for that lean. And on the right side of our pelvic girdle angle, our right hip is further away from the track, meaning that we're having to lengthen our right leg or our outside leg in order to make contact with the ground and still be able to run. Now there's some implications here, especially with our kinematics and our eccentric lengthening, especially in our hamstrings. Anybody who's run on a tight turn knows in end track that hamstrings are going under a lot of pressure. We've had a lot of injury this year, even on the EOU track team, just from this alone. The inside leg, the eccentric lengthening isn't complete. So the contraction on your inside hamstring is a higher load without the hamstring being fully lengthened. And so that's a cause of risk for injury in the inside hamstring. In the outside hamstring, we're doing two things. We're locking out our knee, and we're going through plantar flexion, meaning that all of our hamstring is stretched and going through a lot of force and strain and going through eccentric lengthening on our outside hamstring, also at high risk of injury. Now on a 400 meter track, we're not experiencing enough inertia to lean far enough to make this hazardous for us. But we need to think about how the forces of inertia are making us do this and what our compensation for it is. Now, in a regular 400-meter track, we have a long curve. It's about 115 meters. We'll get to that later. But these long curves are making it so that we're not turning fast enough to promote a high inertial force. And so we're not having to lean as much. Now, when we can condense this down to a 200-meter track, even visually, we can see how much tighter we have to turn when we navigate that curve, and we're turning faster in a shorter distance. So inertia is increasing exponentially. Thinking about how our runner navigates this, we're going to go through a little problem just to see how much force our runner's going through. So suppose a runner weighing 75 kilograms, about 165 pounds for us Americans, is traveling through a curve of a 400-meter track at 9 meters per second. For reference, 9 meters per second gets you about a 22.2 second 200-meter if you run 9 meters per second the whole way. It's about the average collegiate speed of a 200-meter runner. And a 400-meter track has 115.61 meter curves and a radius of 36.5 meters. Now, the runner's rotating 180 degrees because we enter the curve facing one way and we exit the curve facing another. So that's just a 180-degree turn. And we can plug in our values into our centripetal force and inertia equation, rotating at 14.01 degrees per second on a 400-meter curve. Doesn't seem like a whole lot. That rotational rate is not super high. And then physics tells us that inertia can be calculated with mass times velocity squared over radius. So plugging in our values here, we get a force of inertia of 166.4 newtons. This is about the force required to lift about a 50-pound box. So not super strenuous, not super forceful on our runner as they're navigating that curve, but it still causes us to do a bit of a lean in order for us not to get pulled outside of our lane. Thinking about a 200-meter track, we're condensing our track length by half. We have a 200-meter track now having an arc length and a curve length of 64.4 meters and a radius of 19 meters. So these are exponentially smaller numbers. Our runner is now rotating at 2.79 degrees per meter and 25.11 degrees of rotation per second, and they're still running at their 9 meters per second of speed. So when you shorten the distance, you're increasing the rate of change in motion, and you're getting a higher inertial force. 319.73 newtons is a lot of force, especially for someone whose only point of contact is the ball of their foot on a track. So what we're trying to solve the problem of is how do we navigate a curve that's having this much inertia acting on our runner? If we were to try to lean away 319 newtons of force, our hamstrings would blow up. And then we would, or we'd have to slow down in order to prevent injury, and ask a track athlete, they don't want to slow down. So how are we going to do this? We have to lean as a human in order to counteract inertia, but if we lean too much, we're going to get injured. Now, this is where the professionals got their heads together, and they said, okay, inertia is getting really strong. How are we going to counteract that for our runners by not making them lean or not making them have to run slower? We can see here that our centripetal force and force of inertia are acting on our runner with that flat bank, and our lean is very sharp here with the top of it towards the center of rotational radius, and then our inside pelvic girdle angle being lower than the outside. So this is a big problem. And so the professionals got their heads together and they're like, okay, if we can't have our runners lean themselves, let's create it for them. So that's where the bank comes in. Banking our curves creates that artificial lean for our runners, and so that they're biomechanically promoted to run as if they were on a straight flat surface. We can see here that our pelvic girdle angle is near parallel to our surface, and our spinal angle is near perpendicular to our surface as well. And this is what ideal running looks like, right? Usain Bolt showed us that we want our spinal angle to be perpendicular to the surface of the track and our pelvic girdle angle to be parallel. So in order to move forward on how do we actually do this? How do we actually make some calculations for this angle? What is it going to look like? What surface do we use? How heavy is the runner? All that stuff. We're going to turn to our favorite mathematical process, modeling. Now this is us looking at a real life track. This is in action. We can see here in our curve how it's raised up on the outside and on the same flat level on the inside. And so this bank is creating that artificial lean. And it's important to model this for ourselves, because if it's too steep, we're going to fall down to lane 1. And if it's too shallow, we're still experiencing the same issues as a flat track. We're at high risk of injury, and we're increasing inertia, and we don't have enough lean. So our first model is going to be a frictionless model. Every physicist right now is like, oh, thank goodness, no friction. No friction, it makes it really easy. It's just the first step in these calculations. But this is our force diagram. Our runner became a nice pretty box. Physicists are again thanking me. And we got a box and wedge here. And all these forces acting on our runner, we have our normal force up towards the top, our normal y force, which is just a vector counteracting gravity. We have our centripetal force here on the left and our inertial force here on the right. And then we have gravity. Of course, we are not in space. Now, this theta angle here, down at the wedge, that's our banked angle. That's what we're trying to find. But this theta angle here between the normal force and normal y force is the same. Now, if you want proof, you'll have to come to my capstone talk on June 12th, and I'll prove it for you. But just take my word for it now. So every one of these vectors has a relationship with this theta angle in terms of trigonometry and geometry. We can talk about each one of these vectors in terms of a magnitude and sine or cosine. So when we're pulling our physical definition of centripetal force, aka inertia, from mass times velocity squared over r, we can also pull our values in relationship to theta. Centripetal force is equal to n times sine theta, and then we also have our physics definition of m times velocity squared over r. And then our gravity vector can just be signified as n times cosine theta. Now when we combine centripetal force and gravity, we get tangent theta is equal to velocity squared over radius times gravity. Now this is good because we have a geometric process that we know how to solve for, and then we have all these values that we can input to our equation and get our value for our variable theta. So this is a mathematician's dream right here. Now if we input our values from our previous examples and models, we have 9 meters per second. We have a radius of 19 meters for that 200 meter bank curve. And then we have a gravitational constant of 9.8 meters per second. So plugging all these in, we get our value to be theta is equal to 23.5 degrees. Now, it's important to understand, earlier I talked about the relationship between an ideal velocity and an angle. Our 9 meter per second velocity is the maximum speed that you can run on a frictionless surface banked at 23.5 degrees without flying off the edge. So this is important to think about. This is the first step of our model in order to understand how a person running in the real world will navigate this banked curve. This model is considering friction. So now we're in the real world. We still have our theta angles, but now these two vectors on either side of our object running parallel to the surface of the track is what's called static friction. Static friction is just what keeps you in the same spot. These vectors are going to add up to 0, meaning you stay in your same spot, and what we want to do as track runners is stay in our lane, otherwise we get DQ'd. So we're going to move on to think about how we can apply this model to our math, where we get a theta angle being calculated in terms of both the horizontal plane of our motion and the vertical plane of our motion. Horizontal being left, right, forward, and back. Vertical, of course, gravity and normal force. So a few things before we get into these calculations. Static friction is equivalent to mu Sn. Mu is just a Greek symbol. Then mu s is just the static friction coefficient. Static friction coefficient is just representative of a track surface and how well it does when a surface and an object are rubbing together, how well that surface keeps the object from slipping when more and more force is acted upon it. So in a track, you want to have a high static friction coefficient because you don't want your runners, the more force that they're experiencing, to start slipping. Now, our horizontal plane, I made a nice pretty triangle right here because in physics we can just move our vectors all around because they're just concerned about direction and magnitude. So I just moved my gravity vector over here, made a nice triangle with our theta angle, and then we related our vectors in terms of trigonometry and our sines and cosines. Our vertical plane, we just did the same thing. I moved our centripetal force vector to the top of that triangle, make it nice and pretty and easy to calculate stuff with. And we have our trigonometric identities there as well. So when we combine our horizontal and vertical plane of motion, that's when we're going to get our banked angle and we're going to get a real life answer. So our horizontal plane, we're doing some vector addition. Centripetal force is equal to Fs cosine theta plus n sine theta. And then we get a plug in our physics definition of mv squared over r. And we get that static friction is equal to mu Sn. So we get this equality here for our horizontal plane. Vertical plane, we assign n cosine theta is equal to Fs sine theta plus gravity vector, mass times gravity. And we do some plugging in for our static friction coefficient and our mu s times n. And then we do some algebraic rearranging so that we get gravity is equal to n cosine theta minus mu s n sine theta. Now I just spoke a bunch of gibberish, but it's okay, we're almost there. Combining our horizontal and vertical planes is how we get a calculation based on our runner's complete motion, right? We move in a horizontal and vertical space. We're 3D people. So we put those over each other. We get some nice mathy cancellation, and then we get a final equation of v squared over rg equals, I'm not going to say all that. So this equation is just like our previous frictionless model. This is an equation where we have things we know how to solve for. We have an unknown theta. We have things we know how to solve for, and then we have values that we can plug in. So this is perfect. Now we're going to plug in our same values from before. Our only new value is a static friction coefficient of 0.7. It's a unitless constant number. 0.7 static frictionless coefficient is about average for an indoor track facility surface. The minimum required by the IAAF is a 0.5 under wet conditions, but I don't think we have to worry about that indoor unless a pipe bursts or something. So we plug in our values. We have our v squared over rg on the left, and we plug in our static friction coefficient. We're solving for theta here. We do a bunch of math magic, and we get a negative angle. Oh my goodness. When I solved this with Amy, my heart leapt into my throat. I'm like, how can somebody run on a negative angle? And you know, and I was like, I'm done with school. I'm going to drop out of college, everything. But it's okay, because Amy's like, let's take a look at it again. And we can see here in our horizontal plane model, and in our vertical, we're calculating theta angle from our adjacent angle down to our hypotenuse. And because of these theta angles being equivalent, come to my capstone, we can say, okay, so this theta angle is a calculation of our adjacent, our surface, up to our hypotenuse, the surface of our banked track. And so that's how we can just put some absolute values over it, and we get our degree of 11.47 degrees. That's the angle of our banked curve that we set the angle at in order for us traveling at 9 meters per second to not slip in the presence of friction, right? So these models are connected. We're just considering friction now. Now, unfortunately, I can't slap a patent on that, make millions of dollars, and retire at 22. These professionals who have done these things have considered a lot more than I have, right? And they have to, because they're making this for professional facilities. Now, our angle here does all of the things I wanted it to. We're creating that artificial lean for our runners so that they're not forced to lean so heavily that they're at risk of injury. And they're able to run as close to possible as if they were running on a straight, flat surface. And this is what we want. But those professionals consider a lot more things. Somebody like Usain Bolt running at the same place as Sha'Carri Richardson. Usain Bolt is 6'4". Sha'Carri Richardson is 5'1". They're both dominant in their fields, and they're both going to go to professional track meets. Now, if a facility wants to host both of them, they need to consider how to make a surface to cater to both of their athletic abilities, because they're dominant in their fields, and to their different proportions. Professionals also need to consider the fact that multiple races are run on an indoor 200-meter bank curve, right? If a 400-meter runner and a 200-meter runner both run their race, in track and field, they both have to run in their own lane for at least 2 curves. So a 200-meter track, you start on a curve, you run your lane in your curve, and then you run another curve all in your lane, and then you finish. In a 400, you do the same thing, but it's an extra 200 meters, and you break in after 200 meters. So it's important to think about how people traveling at different speeds based on different lengths of races will navigate these banks as well. We also have to think about varying levels of competition. The podium that we were at when I competed at EOU, they host anything from high school to some collegiate nationals. So you got to think about how you can vary and calculate your angle to consider all levels of competition that you would want to host at your facility. We have to think about, in the same competitions at the collegiate level, some of the spectrums of 200-meter times and other race times are astronomical. Somebody could be running a 25-second 200, but also somebody's running a 21.5. So thinking about these things is important as well, considering our banked angle. Height and weight of runners is super important. Just going back to Usain Bolt and Sha'Carri Richardson, it's a 1 and 3 inch difference. Center of gravity is different in the two of them, and so they have to think about those things. And they have to think about the different surfaces that you'd want to purchase for your bank track. There's different brands like Mondo who create an optimal track surface for indoor, but not everyone chooses Mondo. So you got to consider the static friction coefficient of your surface as it plays into the way that you calculate this angle. These are my references. This has helped me construct this presentation and move along the way. These are some really cool links if you wanted to take a look at these. These are some tracks in motion or in action. You can look at some facilities. You can look at the standards for the World Athletics Organization, how they require these tracks to be built. Thank you to my parents and family who have shown me their support since day one. They're right here in the front row. Thank you to Dr. Amy Yielding, Dr. Steve Tanner, Dr. Colby Heidemann, and my capstone classmates. Jackson's right there. And for just investing in my work. My capstone classmates have heard this presentation probably 15 times. And above all, thank you to my wife, whose support and love is a gift every day, and I'm appreciative of it. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the Spring Symposium Committee for hosting this, and thank you for this opportunity. I think we want to open it up to questions, Steve, right?
Yes, thank you very much. Are there any questions for DJ? Nancy, let me bring the microphone over to you.
Hi, DJ. Thank you for this great presentation. I'm an English major, so the math was kind of like up here. But, I'm so excited that you are going to be teaching students math. I think a lot of times we teach students not to like school. And what I really liked about your story of your presentation is that your project arose from a moment of curiosity. How will you as a teacher help students find intellectual fun in their learning?
Oh, that's a great question. Intellectual fun has a lot of parts to it. Part of that is knowing why you're doing what you're doing, right? No student wants to sit there and be told things that they can't use. Math has infinite applications. And so intellectual fun has to do with, okay, how can I learn this new thing and how can I apply it to something that I can do fun in my life? For me, I love athletics. I love running track. Track has been my life for about a decade. And seeing how I could relate, how math related to this topic, it was so fun, and I want to create that for students. It's super important that they are enjoying being there and enjoying being intellectual, enjoying being academic.
Thank you, DJ, for your presentation. Just a question while I was looking at this. How do you manage the interfaces between the curves and the straight portions of the track?
That is going to be something I'm going over in my capstone talk. We're going to be talking about a rate of degrees per foot. So as you travel along the curve, how much you grow in degrees up to your angle of the bank track, and then how you decelerate as well. Because if it just became all of a sudden an 11-degree curve, you would probably eat it. And then you also don't want it to be too slow because the curves are on a certain length. So yeah, come to my capstone project and I'll go into that.
Questions? Yes.
Thanks, DJ. That was really cool. So in your calculations, when you go from your inner lane to your outer lane and R is changing, did you calculate the difference between, especially like on that track that had like 8 lanes in it with the curve?
Yes.
Did you look at the differences between the inner and outer lane?
Yes, so also in my capstone talk, I left a lot to be discovered, but it's important to think about how when we have our radius of our curve, each lane isn't experiencing the same curve, right? They're in different lanes, they're increasing their distance that they're traveling. So it's important to think about how our point of inertia and rotation goes in between each lane. And so the 19 meters is really just to think about how it goes from the point of radius, or the point of rotation, that's the center point in our half circle, out to the beginning of the track, and then also considering how it goes out to each lane. So multiple radiuses will come into my calculation, but we are doing a constant bank. We're not doing a curve up. So it's really just going to be one consistent angle between all of the lanes.
Great job. I have a question about application. So you as an athlete, Do these things cross your mind when you're going into that bank? And do you foresee this being beneficial to runners to consider how the track is benefiting them or not benefiting them?
No, absolutely. As a track athlete, we went to a lot of facilities. U of I, their indoor facility actually has a 290-meter flat track. And so they tried to find the middle ground where they could make it track long enough so that they didn't have to bank it. But there's also a lot of facilities that are like a 300-meter bank track or others. So it's really depending on the facility. But I think that in terms of application to track athletes, it's important for them to know, especially in the realm of injuries, why things are happening. So if they're running on a flat track that's super short and condensed and they're trying to go full speed and they're ripping it and they pull their hamstring, it's helpful to know why in order to be able to counteract those things, especially when we're creating facilities to house track meets and competitions.
Any other questions?
Hi, AD.
Hi, DJ. How you doing? Also a math nerd here. But I'm also not a huge track fan, but I'm a huge cycling fan. And I'm wondering if you've looked a little bit at the shape of cycling tracks.
Valendrome?
Yeah, velodrome. I don't know how to say it in English.
Yeah.
But in terms of specifically of strategy, gamesmanship, choosing paths through the curves, because those are very different questions than what happens on a track.
Yeah. I actually, that was part of my motivation for this, thinking about the initial part of the first banked track in existence indoors. It was actually a velodrome for cycling. And because they can move all around that, it needs to be almost NASCAR level, bank. So it's cool to think about how this applies to different sports that are going in circular motion. It's been really fun going into this.
Any other questions?
Talk. Oh, sorry. Really great talk. I was wondering, I don't remember if I saw it, but did you see major differences thinking about the additional issues that the professionals are dealing with in your calculations for theta as opposed to what actual tracks are banked at?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just spoil it for you right now. IAAF regulation is a 10-degree bank. Thinking about how all of these factors play into a 10-degree bank, it definitely has inspired a lot of different calculations. We have to think about more specifics like weight and mass of runners. We have to think about more averaging. We have to think about how we have to decide, the professionals have to decide who they want to cater to most, right? You can't cater to everyone with the banked angle that you choose, but we have to think about what's best for your goal and your accomplishment, right? Now, a facility that's hosting somewhere like, I think it's Glasgow is getting a new indoor track. They have to think about the professionals, right? The IAAF organization, all of the people who are going to the Olympics, they're running at that track. But the podium here, they host a lot of high school meets. And so the differences in applications to those banks and those angles comes from that. Yeah.
Hi, DJ. I had a question. How much does the surface area of the runner's foot impact the banking?
This is actually something I have not gone into yet. I'm not quite sure, but I'd love to do some research on it, but I guess I just don't have that information for you.
Time for one or two more questions. Or if not, let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you, everybody.
Tanya Lubis does have one announcement for the OTP students.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Please feel free to attend the other sessions throughout the day, including the Oregon Teacher Pathway poster presentations in Badgley. Oregon Teacher Pathway students, please gather in front of the stage as we conclude for a group photo before we head back. Thank you.
We do have programs for the day's events out front if you haven't picked one up yet. We've got many poster sessions, several dozen poster sessions. In here at 10:30 is a musical event, 45th Parallel is playing, and there will be a series of talks and panels down the hall. Thank you.